If you have a child in college or a child getting close to going to college, you've probably dealt with the prospect of admissions tests, the ACT or SAT. Well, our next guest wrote a recent column for Real Clear Education with this headline: College admissions tests hinder meaningful education, but they don't have to. Our guest is Tyler Bonin. He is a high school teacher at Thales Academy in Raleigh and also an education fellow with Young Voices. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So, everyone who's ever had to deal with college, whether you are the student yourself or the parent, has had to think about the prospect of taking the ACT, the SAT, or both. It can become very stressful. And in your piece, you focus on the fact that it's not just stressful, it actually takes away from meaningful education for these high school students. How so?
So the process of studying for the SAT, the ACT, of trying to up your score has become a very stressful event for many students. The SAT and the ACTs gained a lot of attention recently for two things. One is because of the sort of arms race that many top-tier colleges are engaging in. Ever since U.S. News and World Report became the source for rankings and the source for parents and students who are looking at colleges, it's just become this competition in terms of always gaining that increase in average SAT and ACT scores among students. And so there's this huge impetus among families to really spend a lot of time engaging with this. Recently, it was even in the news in California, as several civil liberties groups have threatened to file a lawsuit against the University of California system, citing the fact that the SAT is inherently discriminatory because you have those families who have the resources to hire outside tutoring, to hire a lot of help for the SAT, versus those students who are in underserved schools and whatnot, right? But beyond that, though, the recent changes to the SAT, and this was done at the behest of David Coleman, who's the newer CEO of College Board, who develops and administers the SAT, has aligned the SAT with Common Core, of which he was also the chief architect. And so what you've seen with the SAT, and the ACT tracks along as well because it also attempts to align with Common Core, is a move away from those traditional texts, those traditional elements of education to a sort of data-based, informational-based test. So, for instance, in Common Core, by the time kids are in 8th grade, over half of what they read needs to be informational in nature. And by the time they graduate high school, the requirements have it so that nearly 75% of what students read are informational texts. And so that doesn't leave any room for sort of the great works, the great literary works, philosophical works that we know to have been sort of the pinnacle of a traditional education.
And so we're talking about reading something like a how-to magazine article or instructions for putting something together rather than reading Plato or Dante's Inferno or something like that. Is that what we're talking about?
That's true. That and works that might be sort of journalistic works, and of course they have value in our society. Journalists are very important, but it doesn't present them with the opportunity to really push the boundaries of the way that they think about things, as you mentioned before, a philosophical work would, had they had to read, say, Kant or Aristotle or something like this.
So this is something that's tied into now the ACT and the SAT. One of the interesting things about your piece at Real Clear Education is the fact that there's another test out there that actually offers an alternative, and you suggest a better one. Tell us about that.
Yes, so the new test that I was referring to is the Classic Learning Test, known as the CLT. It's acronym. And that test has been around for a while now. It started with a few schools accepting it, as well as institutes within a school. For instance, Clemson Institute for the Study of Capitalism also takes this test. They work with a lot of the great books in a program that's focused on the moral foundations of a free market economy. So they use that. They were using that test to gauge applications coming in. But now you're looking at over 170 colleges that are accepting this test, and the basis of this test is that it's focused on the great books and prominent historical figures of the United States. And so I mentioned in the article, you're looking at a test that's going to include passages from Aristotle to Archimedes to Susan B. Anthony, Booker T. Washington, and others. And so it's giving a new life to what it means to engage with the great works and great conversation.
From your vantage point, why is that so important to not just have the basic skills of reading a journalistic article, but to have engaged in these great books and have learned about historical figures who are important?
Well, to be honest, that's sort of the bigger conversation, the bigger debate that's being had in education now. We are fundamentally built on these works, right? We came from the Western tradition, and these works are fundamental to understanding that tradition. To really engage with history at a deep level, to understand where we are today, you have to engage with the important conversations across time. It means more than simply analysis of a text. It's important to know how to read, but it's also important to know how to read between the lines, how to think at a deeper level, and to think critically. And sometimes when you're just engaging with a student, asking them to simply restate the main idea of a passage, and it's a journalistic passage, that's important. You need to know how to read, but it's not really getting at the root of what it is to mean to truly learn, to engage at a much deeper level with ideas that are sometimes really hard to grapple with.
As an educator who's dealt with high school students, do you see a difference when you have the students who are focused on, I got to do something that's going to help me on the SAT versus, I'm engaging in these books. I'm engaging in these great ideas that have come down through the ages?
I do. I really do. It's a hard sell at first. I think that's, again, part of the nature of education today. Of course, I teach at a classical academy, so we're trying to get back to the root of true learning. These notions of truth, beauty, and goodness, right? But I think what happens, though, is that when you keep everything at a surface level, you have for instance, you have grades as a sole exogenous motivator. It's always about doing what you need to do to achieve the grade or to achieve the score. And so you're going through, I see sometimes students fall in this trap of going through the process, not to better themselves, not to grapple with an idea and come to a better understanding, not to seek the truth necessarily, but just to seek that grade. I think Common Core and the SAT sort of exacerbates that notion of having this outside motivating force instead of trying to engage with the great works that help to build the motivation force from within, the motivation force to learn and to understand your world better.
How about in terms of just the way that the students react to education? Based on what you've just said, I'm getting the sense that the kids who are just trying to get the grade, that is the focus, and education itself just becomes the mean to get the grade because they need the grade to move on to college or so on. I would guess that those kids are less excited than the ones who are hearing these ideas and thinking, oh, this is something I've never thought of before, or yes, that's exactly what I've been thinking, or no, I don't think that, I disagree.
Right.
Are those kids who are engaged in that way much more excited about being in the classroom?
I would say yes to that. I definitely think so. I think this massive move to make education about data, and that's what I think is the root of what the SAT and the ACT is focused on. So when it was aligned with Common Core, I think Rick Hess at AEI referred to it as the Common Coreification of the SAT, which is a good term for it. It's made it about skills. And don't get me wrong, skills are important in the 21st century market. And in today's workforce, you need to have particular skills, especially analysis, data analysis, and whatnot, your ability to read a text, your ability to write. But again, that focus on skills and skills only really sucks out any life from education. As you said, you don't have that necessary engagement with big ideas that you may or may not agree with, and forces you to think logically and rationally about your ideas. It forces you into a line of reasoning to promote your ideas if you're in an argument with somebody, which simply just doesn't happen with the way that a lot of this coursework is constructed today.
Okay, started this conversation talking to the parents of those who either have kids in college or probably more importantly, those who are getting close to the process of going to college. Some of them may be listening to us and saying, yeah, that sounds great, but my kid needs to get a job. They need, they need to do what's going to get them to the point of getting a job. When you hear that from a parent or from someone on the outside who says, "Yeah, it sounds nice, but this is the world we live in," what's your response to tell them that maybe we ought to be thinking about this in a different way?
There's a lot of notions around education as vocational training that I've grappled with recently, and it's a matter of the age that we live in today. Students are taking on more and more debt. The average debt level is going up, while it seems the average starting salary is sort of stagnated, and that's an important aspect of it. But the notion that, for instance, I get a lot of, well, humanities, for instance, is all fine and dandy, but STEM jobs are where it's at. But when you look at the numbers, for instance, when you look at entry-level computer programming jobs, that's not necessarily the case. That if you don't have a passion for it, that you'll be able to find something. A lot of those jobs, we're in an age when a lot of programming is automated or moved offshore, for instance. Those skills that you develop through the process of thinking critically are those skills that will be perennial. And that's the biggest thing of getting across. For instance, if you're teaching a computer programming class, that's great, but those skills will be outdated in a week or so. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but it's not too far off. The skills of thinking are truly perennial, and those are the types of things that we need to get across, I think, sometimes a little bit more as educators. And there are examples. I mean, I can point to anecdotes. In Silicon Valley, for instance, you have Slack, which is a very successful company, and its CEO was working, he has his master's degree in philosophy and attributes a lot of his thinking about communication with his degree in philosophy. Slack, of course, being a communication tool that's used by businesses worldwide.
So this is not just something that helps build the mind and thinking skills, but could end up having some vocational applications for those who are worried about that. As you're dealing with students and putting them through the more rigorous, mind-growing type of education than just focusing on the data, that has to be kind of satisfying as an educator, that you're not just treating them as cogs in the machine to move on and give them the A and help them get to the next level, even if they haven't really engaged in material in a meaningful way.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the biggest things that I like to see in the classroom is silence at some point. And I know that sounds a bit funny as a teacher, but what I mean by that is, I want them to be a bit uncomfortable at some points in terms of maybe pushing the boundaries of the way they think about things, and that really, in that place of discomfort of where we're really trying to understand if what we think we know is actually what we know, is where they truly grow. Because this is a day and age, of course, where everybody has an opinion, but this is also a day and age where maybe those opinions aren't informed by logic, for instance. And so to have that moment of silence when we're having, say, a Socratic seminar, when students are really examining the conclusion they came to, and they're forced to examine the way at which they arrived at that conclusion, makes them a bit uncomfortable, makes them maybe grapple with some of their own contradictions, and they're growing in that moment. And those conversations usually come from Socratic seminars when we're talking about a particular text that might be a bit more difficult and challenge their thinking. Where they arrive from that point is a completely new understanding of who they are, of what they thought they knew, and where they're going to go from that. And I just don't think you're going to get that same level of reaction. You're not going to get that same process by reading a text that's purely informational in nature.